Hi everybody, we're here today at our TRIAD meeting. I want to introduce you to our social worker at New Lenox. This is Ariel Ruttenberg. Today she's going to be talking about social services for older adults and many resources as well available.
Okay. All right, well, first of all, thank you guys for allowing me to be here and talk about social services for older adults. I'm very excited to be here. So as Officer Christine Kieltika said, my name is Arielle Rettenberg. I am the police social worker for the New Lenox Police Department. And just a little bit of an introduction about myself and some of my clinical experience. I do have my Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology. I have a second master's degree in Health Administration. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Illinois. I also have 2 further certifications, one in as a clinical trauma professional, another one as a certified addictions-informed mental health professional. And I have a lot of clinical experience prior to coming to the New Lenox Police Department in trauma, post-traumatic stress, serious mental illness, so we're looking at delusional disorders and psychosis, intellectual disabilities, domestic violence, and sexually problematic behaviors. So actually the bulk of my clinical experience, I have worked with sexual offenders as well as victims of sexual violence. So the work that I do for New Lenox, and actually October will be my 2-year anniversary with the department. I do a lot of different things. Primarily, I provide follow-ups to case reports and follow-ups to individuals who have come into contact with the police department. Now, this could be in relation to domestic-related cases, mental health crises, substance use and abuse, as well as overdoses. Most things related to juveniles and certain things related to older adults. I also provide emergency crisis counseling, and what that means is I'm kind of like the junction between when someone comes into contact with the police until I am able to get them referred and actually enrolled into a counseling agency that would be more long-term. So right now, obviously with COVID and then just pretty generally speaking, wait lists to get into agencies are rather long. So I'm kind of bridging that gap. So in an emergency crisis, I do provide counseling, sometimes just in a one-shot go. Other times I might be seeing an individual client for maybe a period of 4 to 6 weeks, just until that individual is able to get into something that would be a little bit more long-term. I also do a lot of different things actually inside the walls of the police department. So I provide support to our officers in a lot of different ways. I do on-scene crisis intervention, where I may actually be called to the scene with our officers if it's safe enough for me to be there. I don't carry a weapon or things like that, so certain things I'm not able to go to. I do provide assistance with resources with our officers. Sometimes I get a phone call, text, hey, do you have a very specific resource for XYZ, things like that. I also do ongoing training for our officers, usually on a quarterly basis. I just kind of pick a topic. I go into all of our roll calls and do a presentation on that topic. The most recent was domestic violence. Our next training will be on anxiety and anxiety disorders. And so these topics are also, or not only for our officers to be a little bit more well acquainted with what they're encountering in the community, but also things that they may be seeing within themselves and in their homes. Also, since I've started, we have developed and implemented a peer support team in New Lenox. And what that means is that our officers are actually supporting our officers. So we have a number of our officers trained and certified in peer support, where they're able to recognize certain things with regard to mental health, things that officers may be struggling with, and then are trained in certain types of interventions that are kind of first line interventions, just check-ins with people, having resources on hand. I supervise this team. I check in with this team on a frequent basis. Any issues that go beyond what our officers are trained to handle then come to me, and then I am able to handle them on a little bit more of an in-depth or a little bit more clinical scale. So moving forward with things that I deal with in the New Lenox community are domestics. So first and foremost, domestic violence can take many shapes and many forms. We have our physical violence, so you're looking at battery, so hitting, shoving, pushing, kicking, biting, spitting, things like that. We have our sexual violence, so that's any form of sexual contact where consent is not given. Verbal and emotional. So verbal is, calling somebody names that you probably shouldn't be calling them, or when you're threatening someone. And then emotional is kind of goes alongside the verbal. We see a lot of our intimidation with emotional violence, a lot of our gaslighting where you're almost trying to make somebody believe that they are in the wrong when you in fact are the offender. And financial violence, where someone's kind of using you for financial gain. Domestic violence can also happen to anyone in any kind of relationship, at any age, and at any point in time. So one thing that I specifically do with regard to domestic violence is that I assist with obtaining emergency orders of protection, also no contact orders, which are very similar to orders of protection. It just depends on the type of relationship that you have with a person. And orders of protection, that's just what the state of Illinois calls them. We often see them in TV shows and movies being called restraining orders. Same thing. There's really not too much of a difference there. But the process in obtaining one can be very confusing, can be very overwhelming for the person. So I, guide people through the process, explain to them how to get one. Sometimes I even go to the courthouse with them. Leads to the next point, assisting with courtroom advocacy. Oftentimes I am in the courtroom with victims, either with regard to the orders of protection or with regard to the ongoing court case. And then also connection to local domestic violence resources. So we have a couple of agencies in the area. A little further out, the more you go, there's a couple more agencies. But really getting that information out there with regard to our victims in the area, just making sure that they have all of the resources that they need. So talking about domestics with regard to older adults are particularly vulnerable to elder abuse. What elder abuse is oftentimes children, other family members, or caretakers simply are taking advantage of the older adult because they are an older adult. Sometimes there may be physical limitations, memory limitations to the older adult, and so that allows the person to be taken advantage of a little bit more easily than someone who does not have those limitations. Elder abuse, again, can take many forms. It could be that physical violence, it could be emotional violence, it could be very, very many things. And older adults are also particularly vulnerable to financial abuse as well. Again, we're sometimes looking at that mental limitation, but other times, it may be by children of, well, you know what, you got to give me $5,000 because, X, Y, Z. Or, you know what, I really need the money right now. I'm not going to come visit you. I'm not going to bring you my kids to visit you. You're not going to be able to see your grandchildren unless you give me $5,000. Which really, that's a form of manipulation. That's a form of intimidation that older adults are very, very vulnerable to experiencing. So signs of elder and financial abuse in older adults: bruising or other types of physical injuries, such as bed sores. So I mentioned caretakers earlier. Caretakers may not be doing their jobs, and if there are physical limitations in the older adult and they're not being turned over, they're not being cleaned properly by a caretaker, that is a form of elder abuse. The individual appearing dirty, dehydrated, underfed, anything that seems out of the range of normal, of being healthy. Changes in mood, changing in banking or spending patterns, and the abuser refusing to leave the elderly person alone with others. So that's that power and control that the abuser has over the older adult. And power and control is something that is a very, very common theme in domestic violence. So moving on to mental health crises. So a mental health crisis is a situation where an individual's behavior puts them at risk of harm to themselves or others, or a situation where that person is being prevented somehow from taking care of themselves. So common mental health problems, we have depression, where probably the most common themes are these suicidal thoughts and feelings. Most common behavior is probably self-injury. We have anxiety. A lot of the behaviors we see common with anxiety might be hoarding, obsessive compulsive behaviors, so those checking behaviors, really common one is, with the light switches before you leave the house, or, checking the gas range 37 times before you leave your home, okay? And then even agoraphobia. So you're seeing that fear of actually leaving the home because there's such a high anxiety response. Excuse me. Trauma. So trauma is both depression and anxiety related, and often includes having flashbacks of whatever the traumatic event was, having triggers. So say the traumatic incident was a car accident, your trigger might be hearing a car horn outside because somebody honked their horn right before you got into a car accident. And then avoidance. So you might even be avoiding getting into a vehicle for quite some time. Then personality disorders. There are several different types of personality disorders. I'm not going to get into the specifics of them, but common behavioral themes in some personality disorders that will often lead to a mental health crisis is risky behaviors and risk-taking. So some examples of this is hopping on the highway and hitting 120 miles an hour because you want to feel that rush of going so fast. It might be engaging in risky sexual behaviors. It might be risky gambling, going to, the casino over here on the river and spending a lot of money that you don't have. Those are all risky behaviors that can often lead to a crisis. So with regard to mental health, older adults are particularly vulnerable to depression, first off. Oftentimes, grief and loss is one of the biggest factors. As you age, you experience more death. You experience more loss of your friends and your loved ones. And death is usually something that people really don't get good at dealing with. And the more and more death and grief and loss you experience, the more it compounds upon the previous one, and the more difficult it gets to be to manage. Thoughts about death and thoughts about the afterlife. Sometimes people question, what is death? What is it going to feel like? Is it going to hurt? Am I afraid of death even? Is there an afterlife? What is the afterlife going to look for me? If you're religious in any way, shape, or form, am I going to go to heaven? Am I going to go to hell? Was I a good enough person to go to heaven? All of those thoughts can make a person feel good about themselves depending on whatever their answers are, or actually may make them feel more depressed. Sometimes even the reflection on an individual's life may lead to increased depression. A person may have regrets. A person, might be thinking about what they could have done differently with their lives. And sometimes thinking about whatever their legacy is that they're leaving behind. Maybe a person chose not to have a family when they were younger, and now they wish, I wish I had kids to carry on my legacy. Now I have nothing left. I'm not passing on my last name. I'm not passing on my genetics, Or maybe something like with a family business. Maybe a family business went under while that person was managing it. And now that's what they consider their legacy, that they have nothing to pass on to the younger generation in their family. Just a couple of examples. Anxiety. Kind of talked about the depression with regard to death, but there's also anxiety with regard to death. I kind of mentioned, is it going to hurt? What's it going to feel like? When is it going to come? I think probably the biggest question people ask is, when is it going to come? Because there's sometimes not a good answer to that question. And then anxiety about leaving loved ones behind. Are my loved ones going to be okay? What happens if I go sooner rather than later? Did I do enough planning to make sure that they're going to be okay, to make sure that they're going to be comfortable? Substance use and abuse. So when we talk about substance use disorder, it's the recurrent use of a substance leading to addiction and clinical impairment of affective, so your emotional, social, and occupational functioning. And co-occurring disorders occur when there is a substance use disorder present alongside a mental health condition. So when we think about substance use disorders, the very, very common ones that probably come to mind, we have your alcohol, marijuana, your benzodiazepines, so Xanax, Valium, heroin, cocaine, meth, tobacco. A lot of people forget about tobacco, but it is a substance, and it is a substance that you can become addicted to the point that it becomes a substance use disorder. So signs of substance use and abuse: rapid changes in mood or behavior, and oftentimes that rapid change comes because you're coming down from whatever the substance is and your body is craving the substance again. Excessive spending to get a hold of the substance. Some of these things are not cheap. Okay, so you might be spending more money than you have, or spending your entire paycheck just to get a couple of grams of something that you really, really want. Social isolation. Sometimes there is guilt and shame involved. So I'm not going to go hang out with my friends. I don't want them to see the track marks on my arms. Or I don't want to have to leave the room because I have to go snort something in the bathroom. So they will isolate sometimes. You're going to have those physiological changes, so rapid heartbeat, sweating, when you're nodding in and nodding out. And again, that's all in relation to the substance processing through your body. And then again, risky behavior taking. So that's usually when we're up on the drug. Our brains are not working correctly. When we have too much alcohol in our body, do we make the best decisions? Probably not. That goes for any type of drug or substance. So older adults, with regard to substance use and abuse, are particularly vulnerable to alcohol use, tobacco use, and marijuana use, mostly because those are the easiest to get a hold of. Okay? The younger people are the ones that are going out and getting the drugs that are the street drugs. That's what a lot of the research shows. Alcohol, tobacco, you can just walk into a gas station for those. Okay? Marijuana, it is becoming a little bit more legal in a lot of states, so it is easier to get a hold of. In Illinois, if you have your card, you can just walk into a dispensary that way. But I do want to take a second to talk about prescription medications. So lots of older adults have medical conditions where a medication is already prescribed to the older adult. Okay? Having an underlying mental health condition that is untreated may make you more vulnerable to overuse of that prescription medication, because that prescription medication a lot of times leads to numbing of not only the physical pain but also of emotional pain when you overuse. So a lot of these drugs typically are opioids. So we have, your oxy, Vicodin, morphine, methadone, fentanyl, and overuse of these drugs can be deadly. Okay, highly addictive to begin with, but also very, very deadly. So just some older adult related issues that I also deal with pretty frequently. Talking about dementia. So it's the loss of cognitive functioning, so thinking, remembering, reasoning, judgment, that interferes with an individual's ability to engage in activities of daily life. Okay, dementia is just something that is organic, that happens within the body. There's really no way to prevent it once it starts, and there's really no way to control how quickly it goes. Sometimes it goes quickly and sometimes it goes really slowly. Sometimes it progresses into physical symptoms, so having problems eating, so like swallowing and actually chewing, and problems walking. So then you have mobility issues as well. And because it is the actual physical decline of the brain, oftentimes it will lead to difficulty controlling emotions. So the individual can actually become very, very quick to anger and oftentimes very, very slow to calm. And then this kind of also relates back to some domestics where that's kind of a theme that we see in a lot of domestic situations. High degree of anger, high degree of aggression, and a very slow period of calming down. Okay. Sometimes these individuals, will get confused. They'll often drive or wander on foot and forget where they're at or where they live. And that's a very common way that individuals with some form of dementia will come into contact with the New Lenox Police Department. A family member will either report them as missing or will get a call with regard to a welfare check of, there's an elderly gentleman kind of walking aimlessly on the road and, something appears not to be right with this situation. So then we'll go and check it out. I would say it doesn't happen often, but it does happen more frequently than I would like to say that it does. Okay. Self-neglect. So this is a very difficult topic to talk about. This self-neglect occurs when the adult is no longer to care for themselves or meet their basic daily needs. Oftentimes there's poor hygiene involved and unsafe living environments. Sometimes they cannot feed themselves, they cannot cook for themselves, sometimes they can't even drive, they can't go to the grocery store to even purchase groceries for themselves. Usually they're unable to make or attend medical appointments as well. I say this is a difficult topic to talk about because these cases are often the saddest that come across my desk with regard to older adults because self-neglect is so difficult to prove. And it's not illegal to neglect yourself. It's not. I mean, I wish it was, but it's not. And these cases involve getting several different agencies involved. And again, it's not illegal to do these things to yourselves. So all these agencies, what they want to see, is the individual at risk of losing their home or is the individual at risk of actual death? And in a lot of cases, the answer is no. But what you can see is that this person will at some point in time be at risk of imminent death. I can think of one case in particular. I had made probably 10 to 12 calls to Adult Protective Services to report self-neglect. The family was asking me to report self-neglect. The family was reporting self-neglect as well. Adult Protective Services just kept saying, she's allowed to live this way. She's allowed to live this way. And again, it's not illegal. She was not taking care of herself to the point that she was urinating and defecating on herself, not doing laundry either, so she was re-wearing a lot of the same clothes. And, excuse me, she had open wounds on her legs that then became infected from wearing the clothing that was soiled. And that is when Adult Protective Services finally got involved because the infection actually became septic. But it took about, like I said, 12 calls. And then I don't know how many times the family also called. But that is an example of when it became life-threatening because everything finally compounded upon each other. But like I said, these are usually the saddest cases that kind of come across with the police department. But when to seek help? So if you or a loved one, excuse me, I think I just did too much talking without taking a drink. If you or a loved one has any type of mental health problem, so not only just anxiety or depression, 2 weeks or longer without any type of relief. Okay, we're looking at that 2-week point. So I don't know what's happening. Oh my goodness. So 2 weeks or longer. So if you feel sad for like 4 days and then you feel better for 4 days, that's okay. Now, if you're looking at 12 days where all day, every day, you feel sad, that's where it's an issue. So we're looking 2 weeks approximately or longer, no relief, okay? That's a problem. Obviously, any type of thought or feeling in relation to suicide or self-injury, having rapid changes in mood. So being calm, like everybody in this room is right now except me, and then all of a sudden just like going off the wall. All right, that's a rapid change in mood. Having frequent nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance of emotional triggers, so those are all symptoms of trauma. Engaging in extreme social isolation. Being a victim of any form of domestic violence. So including but not limited to the elder abuse piece and the financial abuse piece. Having increased use of any form of drug or alcohol. So increase from what is the norm for you. Having trouble remembering events, locations, names, or anything else that may be concerning to you. Or if they may be a victim of self-neglect. And again, these cases are very hard to prove. It's also going to be very hard for the individual to admit. And you might need assistance from another loved one, from multiple loved ones, or from multiple governmental agencies. Okay. So if you go to the sheet that I had printed out, I just included a series of resources for you guys that are available to you in the area. So specific for domestic violence, right in Joliet, we have Guardian Angel Community Services. Guardian Angel houses several different programs for our county, one of them being Groundwork. Groundwork is the domestic violence program. They do tons of different things. They are fantastic. Their contact information is on that packet. Probably the two biggest things that they do is courtroom advocacy in the order of protection courtroom, and they can assist you in obtaining an order of protection. They also offer free counseling, individual and group counseling for victims of domestic violence. Also, just kind of the county and the county courthouse in general. The information is on there for the state's attorney's office, the order of protection office, the circuit clerk, and then that legal assistance number. That is Prairie State Legal is the name of the agency. They offer, or they do pro bono, or for a very, very, very small fee, take on cases. A lot of them are like family violence related in the county. And like I said, pro bono or a very, very small fee. Now they only have a certain number of attorneys, so they can only take on a certain number of cases at one point in time. But they do whatever they can to try to help, okay? For mental health and substance use and abuse, I have several types of agencies here listed. So the first one underneath mental health, where it says no cost or reduced fee, those are going to be for individuals that either do not have health insurance or are on state health insurance. Okay, so there's a couple of different options here. Bridges to a New Day, for example, they have Darlene's counseling program, which is a reduced fee counseling program. Right below that, New Life Church has a branch of the Chicago Christian Counseling Center in town. They offer faith-based and non-faith-based services. They also have pricing not only to see an unlicensed clinician, but also to see interns, different pricing for those who do have insurance. It's another one. Oh, Advocate, their trauma recovery center. It's free services for victims of the violent crimes that are listed right there. You can turn the page to where it says private insurance mental health counseling agencies. These are agencies in town that are great at what they do, and those are for people that have private forms of insurance. If you turn the page again, these are the agencies that I frequently refer to for substance use and abuse. Some of them are residential, so that first whole page is residential, and you can kind of see my notes. Like, for instance, Recovery Centers of America, they only take private health insurance. So if somebody does not have health insurance or is on state health insurance, they cannot receive services there. But they do this cool thing. If you call them and you do not have health insurance, they will help you find a bed elsewhere. And there's not a lot of places that do that. There's information for AA in the area. So Will County is District 51. So it's aadistrict51.org/meetings/ will show you, there's meetings every day in this area. Same thing for Narcotics Anonymous. Here's another example of like a note. Timberline Knolls is another residential facility that's located in Lamont. It's literally like 20 minutes from here, but it is a female-only facility and a private insurance-only facility. Okay. All right. Older adult specific resources. So I mentioned adult protective services earlier with regard to the self-neglect case that I was talking about. So Guardian Angel, the agency that I was talking about with regard to the domestic violence program, also houses adult protection services for the county. All of their information is listed in that packet for you. Office of the State Guardian, I put their information in there as well. They do a lot with regard to guardianship. So if you have questions about either yourself taking guardianship over another, someone taking guardianship over you, or the state taking guardianship of an individual, they have all of the information. They can guide you through the process. They are wonderful there. We have Senior Services of Will County. Again, another fantastic agency that has so much to offer. Probably the biggest things that I refer people to Senior Services for is their in-home homemaker services and Meals on Wheels. They do have transportation services, and then they also have assistance with utility bills, tax prep, and Medicare applications. So that's probably the three biggest things that I refer people to Senior Services for. But they also have a very active social events calendar. So I'm always telling people, I was like, just go to the website. Like, you don't have to receive services from them in order to attend those events either. So they do tons of different things every week. Sometimes I wish like I could even go to some of the things. They do like dinners. They do like movie trips and dinners and stuff. They do dances. Some of the stuff is really cool what they do. I put the information down for the VA too. Veterans are a very specific part of the older adult population that I feel gets left out a lot, and I feel like they should not get left out. The VA has a lot to offer. I know sometimes maybe people have certain thoughts about the VA, but I work very closely with a number of people within the VA system, and the people that I work closely with are fantastic. They have a suicide prevention program as well as an intimate partner violence prevention program. So those are the programs that I work very frequently with. And if anybody needs information in order to be connected to those programs specifically, I can do that for you. But there is information there. The VA does help a lot with healthcare, housing, employment. And then New Lenox right in town, we have the food pantry, we have transportation services, so that is available to anyone in town, not just only the seniors. But I wanted to throw that on there just in case somebody was not aware of it. And that is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
TRIAD works to improve the quality of life for seniors by providing an opportunity for the exchange of information between public safety, social services, and seniors. There are no membership papers to fill out or fees to pay. Everyone is welcome to attend. Each month, we present a guest speaker on subjects that keep you informed and up to date on the latest scams, frauds, and other criminal activities. We also discuss safety issues, home preparedness, and staying healthy. TRIAD meets the fourth Thursday of every month. Contact the Lenox Police Department at 815-462-6100 for more information.